Rachel Lang, welcome back to the new school.
Thanks so much for having me back, Michael.
Rachel, you and I have become friends, and when we were talking after we did the spiritual biography conversation so far, we both realized that there were important things that hadn't really come up. Mm-hmm. And so we made sort of a little list of those, and I wanted to explore them with you.
Great.
Yeah. So the first part, I've talked about how deeply I appreciate astrology as an archetypal system. Mm-hmm. And there's one way of holding astrology which any thoughtful human being should be completely comfortable with, which is these are archetypal images which evoke powerful stories which feel comfortable to us, and their exactness seems to fit us. And therefore, it doesn't really have anything to do with the birth date or the stars. It's simply the power of the archetypal stories. So, but then there's another school of thought, which you are very familiar with, that in fact, astrology really works in terms of influencing who people are based on where they're born and what happens in their lives based on where the stars are. And is it fair to say that you're definitely in that second group?
I think I bridge both of them. But I think that the reason why astrology works in the way that it does and can show us the trends that we're going through or certain events that are happening in our lives or help us to gain a better level of self-understanding is because of the mythological nature of human beings, of us. And so if these ideas and archetypes, and I would even say electromagnetic frequencies, have been in our collective unconscious for thousands and thousands of years, and cycles repeat themselves over and over and over again. When a cycle repeats itself, we can see similar themes as we did the last time the cycle was in play. So I kind of adopt the idea that there is that, one of my my naturopathic doctor, who's also a friend of mine, told me that one of the strange things about homeopathy is that the smaller the dose, the smaller the organism of the element within the homeopathic remedy, the smaller the element, the more of an effect it has. So there are some mysteries that I think we can only explain through looking at fields like quantum mechanics and things like that. And I think astrology works in a similar way, that there are actually electromagnetic frequencies that our bodies are attuned to because we're made of the same substances as the planets and the stars. And then there's also these mythological stories that we're a part of. So it's, I think there's like an artistry to it and a science to it both.
Beautiful. And speaking of homeopathy, which I have, substantial acquaintance with, the really powerful remedies go down below Avogadro's number, which is the number at which there's not a single molecule left of the original substance.
Yes.
So it goes down into a vibratory field that where the original molecule is no longer there. Yeah.
Yeah, you said it much better than I did, but yes, that's exactly what I was thinking.
The frequencies. Are you speaking of the frequencies that emanate from the different planets, or are you speaking of the frequencies associated with the different archetypal stories, or both?
I think it's both, and obviously, there's a lot that we haven't put our finger on in terms of understanding it and putting all of the pieces together. I think we have little snapshots of the puzzle, but not the whole, but not all the pieces. But I think that we I don't think that we can deny that there are energies and frequencies that are circling around us and that we're all a part of, that are invisible, that invisible realm. And so I think that the planetary energies fall within that. And then obviously they're connected to stories, and we've assigned these stories to these planets and from ancient times. So I think it's all a part of one of the grand mysteries of magic, of some of those old Hermetic texts, like that concept of as above, so below, as within, so without, as the universe, so the soul. We are infinitely connected to everything in created reality in ways that are beyond our comprehension.
I completely agree with that. I mean, speaking of, electromagnetic fields, we know that we've altered them profoundly for the Earth and for ourselves with all our wired EMF things. There's actually good science, which is being suppressed to some degree, about the negative health effects of exposure to some of these fields. And there's also very good science about the positive health effects of some of these fields. So the question of the reality of electromagnetic fields and how they affect our health, both for good and for harm, is very real. And clearly nature is filled with electromagnetic fields. And although one question that comes up about that is whether the EMF spectrum is the only energetic spectrum on which these things operate, or whether there are spectra that we haven't discovered yet, which are actually responsible. I mean, because the scientists tell us, I forget what it is, that we can't see and don't understand 90 or 95% of the universe. Like, it's like a black hole, basically.
Yes.
So we have to have immense humility about the 90% of the universe that we don't understand. And therefore, there may be frequencies, to come back to your point, at which these things are operating that actually aren't on the EMF spectrum, but maybe on some other spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think it was Nikola Tesla who said that that in the future, we will see the world in terms of energy and frequency. And I think we're moving more in that direction. And this is part of what I feel in terms of astrology being much more popular now than it has been in my entire lifetime, in occult sciences kind of making a resurgence, especially with younger generations, millennials, Gen Z. And I think we are moving more into those systems of thought and being open to seeing things that we might not have been able to see before.
That makes a lot of sense to me. So, so you bridge the two schools of thought between the people who see astrology in purely archetypal power terms and those who really believe that the position of the planets actually affects who we are and the cycles. So that's but to take that point a little further, how would the positions of the planets actually affect us? In other words, is that the electromagnetic field vibrational argument?
Yeah, I once heard a lecture at a conference with a physicist, and who was also an astrologer, and she talked about how the ancient I can't remember if it was the Babylonians or the Sumerians, but she talked about how this ancient culture could predict the movement of the heavenly bodies of the planets, the sun and the moon, with absolute precision by connecting the movements of those heavenly bodies with the rhythms of the songs that they sang. And so what she was speaking to was the idea of harmonics, the principles that underlie a lot mathematical theories and music. And what I know working with astrology is that when we look at, the study of planets and the study of astrology is actually a study of relationships. We're talking about how one planet relates to another, whether they're in harmony or discord, and what the effect of that aspect relationship is with life on Earth. And we can look at that in terms of how crops are grown, in terms of what health challenges come up, in terms of global events. And some of what we're seeing right now with the bigger societal shifts have to do with some of those relationships. So there's a sacred mathematics that I think underlies the connecting points of so many aspects of life on Earth, and astrology is one of those systems.
We referenced someone whose name I'm blocking on. I hope you can help me. Who you know his work, and so do I. Who's on the faculty at the California Institute of Integral Studies, and is yeah. Mm-hmm. And he, and in his extraordinary book on astrology, he makes a powerful case that birth dates actually can be demonstrated to affect what careers people go into and so forth.
Absolutely. So your birth date is, if we think about the universe as this living, breathing life force, your birth date is a representation of a moment in the memory of the cosmos, in the memory of the universe. And every single moment is so unique because cycles don't repeat themselves for thousands of years. And so when I look at a birth chart, I see not only the historical context that someone's born into and the culture and the family of origin, but I can also see the effect of all of those systems on your relationships, on your work, and on your physical body, on your family, on the choices that you feel led to make. And while I understand that astrology is one part of a bigger picture, we have our family of origin, we have, the birth order, we have a lot of different aspects that make us who we are. But astrology is part poetry and part math in terms of giving us a roadmap to follow for our lives. And it is like every moment captures a certain energy or a certain essence. So you can assign a birth chart, you can assign a birth date to a business, for example, or to an inauguration or a marriage or any big event in your life. And I actually do work with people to elect a chart or choose a chart for some of these things, because in doing so, if that birth date or that event is capturing the energy of what's happening in the world, then realizing that you have this is where fate and free will come in. Realizing that there are certain things that are destined, but there are certain things that we can affect with our choices or with our attitudes or with our responses. And astrology is one tool that helps us to do that.
Yeah, well, I think in that sense, you as, powerful, intuitive, as a medium who, with the Spiritualist Church and in other ways, is connected with souls that have gone beyond, who has seen Mother Mary and seen angels. You clearly, depending on somebody's belief system listening to us, either your imaginal world is very rich, or you are in touch with other realms. Mm-hmm. And I prefer to believe both, that your imaginal world is rich and that you are also in touch with other realms. But the point is that when you do a reading for me or for somebody else, as you've said, you're using the astrological constellation as a portal for your intuitive self to come through. And to me, that's the difference. So I mentioned to you offline that sometimes I go to Astrodienst, and I actually have ordered, charts from them in the past. And what I find with the potted charts, I'll call it that way, the sort of computer generated charts, is that some parts of them are really resonant and other parts aren't resonant at all. And so it seems to me that what the potted charts are missing is the use of the chart as a portal for an intuitively powerful person to single out the parts that they believe really apply.
Mm-hmm. I think you hit the nail on the head. That's absolutely right. There and this is why I think that there are also some, there are complexities within us. There are different parts of ourselves that don't always agree or want different things. I like to think of the planets as a family, like a family unit within ourselves. And so one aspect of the self may be represented by Mercury, which is thinking and learning, might be in a challenging aspect relationship with the moon, which is the mother, or the family of origin, the caregivers, and that nurturing influence in the life. And so those complexities represent the ways in which we're pulled in different directions within ourselves. And when you as an astrologer or someone as an astrologer with knowledge about astrology looks at a chart, you can often see, oh, this one's probably more active than other ones, or Mercury's a little stronger than the moon. I bet your thoughts outweigh your feelings. So it's there's an artistry to it, like you're saying, and it can be for a lot of astrologers I know, intuition is not a part of it. It's actually, I think in some ways astrology can be for intuitives a framework within which to work, so that they don't have to admit I'm doing an intuition or I'm working with my intuition.
I completely get that. You mentioned the planets as a family constellation and the tensions and agreements and so forth. And that made me think of the great spiritual psychological system created by Roberto Assagioli called psychosynthesis, in which he sees the human personality as having a center, the observing self, and then a whole set of subpersonalities that rotate around that center. And the work of psychological work, which are like the planets as you describe them, the psychological work, there's a little mnemonic that they use in psychosynthesis that you want to name them, claim them, tame them, and aim them. You want to name your subpersonalities, make a list of all your different subpersonalities, claim them, meaning you accept that all these parts, which you may not be comfortable with, but you accept they're parts of them. And that's claiming them. Taming them, you begin to try to work to get them moving in the same direction, which they're not at all doing originally. And then aim them, you take their collective energy, if you can get them to work more together and move them in a direction. And this will come back around later in our conversation, because there are circumstances under which our subpersonalities, under conditions of trauma, can express as multiple personalities. And in that case, the center has not held, and these different fragments are, not in a cohesive relationship with each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think anytime you're working with a spiritual system or, any spiritual system like tarot, like astrology, like any kind of healing modality, I think there exists within that an opportunity to bring those parts into balance and into relationship. And that's one thing I love about the system, by identifying, oh, here's the part that is probably experiencing the most suffering, or representative of where you've experienced suffering in your life. then you can work with it. And so I never look at astrology as a fixed system. It's a system that's growing and evolving as we grow and evolve. And I think that it can really help. It can be such a tool for healing. And when we were talking, after the last conversation, we were talking, and I mentioned, you asked me about the trauma that I mentioned in the last conversation, and so I think, in reflecting on that after we spoke, I think that for me, healing my trauma has been such a focal point in my life, because I feel like when we go through anything in our lives, we have the choice of taking that experience, growing from it, evolving beyond it, and then trauma and suffering awakens compassion within us. And when compassion's awakened, it's really hard not to ask, what can I do to help others? What can I do with the suffering and loss and pain I've experienced, and find a way to alleviate the suffering and loss and pain that exists in the world? And so, astrology was one access point for that. Developing intuition, my spiritual gifts and resources are one access point for that healing. And finding community for both of those things has really allowed me to find ways to make more of a contribution, and to allow my pain and my experience of trauma to turn into something beautiful and rich, and a deep awareness of compassion that compels so much of what I do in every area of my life.
And so let's go into that trauma, because it's one of the things we wanted to talk about. And first of all, for our viewers, it's sort of a viewer discretion advised here, because we're going to be talking about difficult things. I want to say that having co-led, 240 or something like that, week-long retreats for cancer patients, most of the people who come are women. And an immense number of them have experienced abuse as children. And so it's a field that I've spent a lot of time with. But you were kind enough in our subsequent conversations to say, we didn't really address this. And it's such a deep part of your true spiritual biography that we agreed that we would do that. So why don't you tell us what you're comfortable saying about that?
Okay. So I experienced, I like you said, so many women, 1 out of every 3 women and 1 out of every 6 men, I think is the last statistic I read about this, has experienced some kind of sexual trauma. And for me, it happened within the first 10 years of my life, with someone who was close to our family. My parents did not know, and when they found out, they were just my number one supporters and protectors, and really rushed into to find resources for me. And I feel really fortunate that I had help when I did. And one of the things that, I think one of the things that can happen when you experience trauma as a child is that there can be, like you mentioned before, a disassociation process where you leave your body. And that is something that happened to me. And every time that would occur, and I would disconnect from myself, the places I would go, and maybe they were imaginal realms like you talked about, but I was deeply comforted by the presence of Mother Mary. And at times it was very visual, like where I felt like I was in her arms. or I would have a sense of an angel who was with me, holding me through whatever painful experiences I was going through in my body. And so while I know that trauma gets stored in our bodies and trauma is a bodily experience, for me, and I've done a lot of somatic work and a lot of therapeutic processes to heal the trauma in the body. But what I think the gift that came in it for me was that access point to being able to connect with spirit and connect with other realms fluidly, to where I could incorporate a lot of that into my everyday life. And so one of the I think, so I've always had this awareness of these other realms and of spiritual presences. And that's always been a real place of comfort for me. And so it's going into this work in a really conscious way has allowed me to access those same places, but from a place of choice, which I think is, that's empowering.
This started when you were very young.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it continued for 10 years, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So in addition to being able to access Mother Mary and angels and dissociate from the body and go to these places, how did you manage to hold it? In other words, you were living a successful life. You were, as we referenced, you were living in an evangelical Catholic family in a very close community. When people discovered you had these gifts, you were up on stage in front of large numbers of people in this Catholic community. You were praised and supported in these experiences. So there was clearly a level at which what came out of immense pain was also quickly becoming a great gift, right?
Right.
So achieving in school, achieving in your spiritual community, holding success. And then there was this part of you that was held in this secret place by the person who was abusing you, and you had to survive it.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you hold it? How did you survive it?
So I think when, because I was a child, because this had been a pattern that I had known all my life, that had been going on all my life, I never had a before and an after. So there was never a sense of, other than what I felt in my own body, there was never a sense of this is bad. Because it was someone who was a trusted friend in the family. It was it was someone who had a level of trust. And anyone who knows about abuse knows that there's a grooming process. So there's I think a lot of my life was really, there was a lot of confusion about, and actually, I think it led to a system of mistrusting my body and mistrusting my instincts. And so I don't know if I was able to really, I think instead of holding it, I think I compartmentalized it, and didn't look at it or didn't hold it or, distance myself from the reality of this happening until it came out into the open. And then the floodgates opened and I relived a lot of the, I was able to get in touch with anger that had been suppressed. I was able to really work through a lot of the physical trauma and a lot of the emotional trauma. And it was the healing process that made me so passionate. Like, it fired up inside of me a heart for social justice and a heart for protecting children and protecting people I love. It fired up inside of me this heart for service that I have. And so I think that when I look at my spiritual biography, that fire still burns. And so I think a lot of what I do in my life, and I'm talking about in not just in my work, but in my volunteer work or in the ways in which I give back, that fire is coming from a place of understanding pain and understanding loss, and knowing that the gift that can come from that is offering myself or offering my gifts in any way to help prevent pain from happening to someone else, or to help change the systems that allow abuse of any kind to occur. And when I talk about abuse, I think we're talking about these systemic problems, and the problems of power and power structures that have existed, that have led to one group of people dominating another group of people. And, we going back to Catholicism, one of the beautiful things about Catholic social justice teaching or liberation theology is that there's a view that actually structural sin and structural wrongdoing is the prime sin. And everything that we do in our lives, following temptation, anything that we do to harm one another or help one another, it all needs to fall under that umbrella of we are just pieces of a big system of beliefs, of thoughts, of culture, of family, all of those things. And so healing on an individual level has an effect, and it will ripple up to healing on a systemic level. And so for me, my personal healing has been deeply personal, but it's been also with that awareness that anything I do for my own process of enlightenment or my own process of healing is affecting the whole.
And this is exactly what we talked about privately, which is the power of Catholic social doctrine, which you studied theology in depth. You have a master's in theology, right?
That's correct.
So you studied Catholic social doctrine in depth. So in a very real way, this is another one of the gifts of your life. Having been brought up in this profoundly evangelical Catholic family and community, and then having had the profound experience of abuse, and then when it came out, reliving and experiencing it, and just going through all the transformations, which led you, as we talked about in the first time, to find the esoteric bookstore, to find astrology, to fall in love with astrology, and then to read widely in the Bailey work and all kinds of other areas, and then to find your way to the spiritualist church, and soon become one of the people who were up on the stage conveying messages from the departed. So there's a way in which you've really taken all this pain and found the gift within it. Both in your work as a healer, your personal life, and your commitment to justice.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So in a very real way, you lost a big piece of your childhood in one way. Mm-hmm. But you also had another loss that in some ways, one might say, in some ways might be seen as recapitulating. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that.
Yeah. In November of 2020, and I didn't talk about this in our first conversation because the grief is real. The grief is, it's this, it's such a deep well of grief that sometimes even just skimming the surface can bring up a lot of emotion. So I can't talk about my experience without talking about my book. I wanted to be a mother more than anything. It's what I wanted for 10 years. And because of what I explained about living my life sort of in half measures and on a fine line of, can I be a lesbian and be accepted by the people I love? Like, because of some of that tension, I think I resisted relationships, and I got to an age where it was, my window was closing for motherhood, and I had felt this spirit, this baby wanting to come through. And, we looked at all different options when we were trying to decide what to do. And ultimately we decided, let's try to conceive. And it was a 4-year process, very painful process, lots of loss in the middle of that. And from that, that's what inspired my book. And so I became pregnant the day before everything closed down for COVID, and I didn't know it yet. And finding out I was pregnant with Stella was a miracle. It was a miracle because it was the impossible pregnancy. And I did everything perfectly because I wanted this child so badly. So I read all the books. I got EMF protectors for my belly. I did all the things, and I had a perfect pregnancy. No complications. Everything went well until the very end. And my daughter was born without a heartbeat, and there was nothing we could do. So it was a shock, after 39 weeks of hearing that everything was okay, feeling and sensing something's off, but not having any evidence to back that up. It was a shock, and it was of all the traumas I've experienced, it was the worst. It was by far the worst. And what I think what came on the heels of that, well, when I told my parents I was pregnant with Stella, they were so excited, and she brought our family together. All of the concerns that I'd had of, what are they going to think of this? Everything, all the fear and all the tension between us, everything dissolved because of this new life and this hope and this joy that was coming into our family. And so my mom said, when I was pregnant, nothing will stop me. I'm going to be there. And so she flew in the night I went to the hospital, and she was there when we got the news. And obviously this was COVID times. She couldn't be with us. And then my dad came. He flew in the midst of COVID, and they were here. And my sister and my brother came, two of the others, and we all gathered as a family, and we grieved together. And we went through all the different stages of grief. And then a few months later, when I was planning my memorial service for Stella, I asked my parents to be a part of it. And so we had, my dad playing guitar, my mom wrote a song, they both led prayers. And we had this moment of deep healing for the entire family that I don't think would have happened if forgiveness hadn't been such a major theme in our relationship up to that point. Me forgiving them for the times when I felt rejected or alienated, them forgiving me for not being the person I think they wanted me to be, and for challenging systems and challenging beliefs. And forgiveness is such an equalizer, because if you don't have the weight of resentment, and you don't have the weight of fear distancing you in that relationship, then there's space for curiosity and connection and coming together. And I think being pregnant with Stella and becoming a mother, I think that opened up for me. It opened my eyes in terms of how I saw my own mother and my own relationship with my mother, and then how I saw her relationship with her mother. So there was generational trauma that was healed in that experience. And, I miss her every day. It's not a day goes by that I don't miss that baby, and miss the light that I felt when I was pregnant with her. But I see her everywhere. I see her. There's an owl that hoots outside at night. And when I go walk the dog, I hear this owl, and I hear Stella in that owl song, because I used to hear it when I was pregnant and up at night. And I see Stella in the stars, and I see her in the ocean. I think that's the beautiful thing about spirit, is that it is alive in everything. And I'm really grateful that I get to experience her in that way, even as I grieve not being able to hold her and feed her and love her.
Mm. Let's just take a moment of silence together, Rachel. Peace, peace. How are you?
It feels really, it feels like every time I talk about her, I feel like I bring her to life. And so there's just, it just lights up my heart.
Mm. Are there any other thoughts or reflections? I'd like to ask you again as we close, but along with any other thoughts or reflections, to just remind people about your book and what it is and how they can find it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. My book is Modern Day Magic, and it's eight simple rules to realize your power and shape your life. And there's a lot of my, when I was having a difficult time getting pregnant with Stella, I did a deep dive into magic, which I had always been working with, but I did a deep dive into magic. So my book is Modern Day Magic, 8 Simple Rules to Realize Your Power and Shape Your Life. And the whole inspiration of the book came from the going through a fertility journey where I was facing roadblocks and obstacles. And I realized that I was approaching it all with my head, and that actually this was a process that needed magic. And so it took me several years to write it, because I was working intently with magic during that time. And so I outline principles of magic, trusting yourself, using magic as a resource of power. I talked a little bit about the history of magic, because that is one of the topics I studied in graduate school. And really it's about, we all have this co-creative energy inside of us. This, it's magic. It lives within the deep feeling, the intuitive realm. And so I connected with Eros and that enlivening essence and that we all have within us. And so my journey with magic was bringing myself back into my body and accessing spiritual resource and spiritual power that I think had been disconnected because of an experience of trauma, because of all of the challenges I had with my body, and with being a lesbian in a system that didn't accept me. So for me, it was it was a way of working with this energy and this spiritual power. And I felt really called to share it with others. So so writing the book was beautiful, because I was in the very last stages of writing the book. I was in the last few months of my pregnancy. And so all of that energy is in there. And I like to hope that when someone reads the book, that they feel it, and that they feel alive with possibility, and that they feel that spark of life within them growing, the heart expansion that happens when that happens. And that opens us up to seeing things for our lives that we never imagined possible.
Rachel Lang, thank you for the friendship we have developed. Thank you for trusting me with doing this intimate spiritual biography. Thank you for being with us at the new school. Thank you for your new book. And I just look forward to many years, God willing, of friendship and of service to life.
Me too. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you too.